What happens when the most feared CEO in the city, an untouchable man who built his empire on discipline and fear, meets a secretary who refuses to be silenced at Pierce Industries? Employees walked on eggshells. Jonathan Pierce, the Millionaire CEO, was a man of order, power, and intimidation. No one dared to question him, until the day Emma Caldwell walked through the glass doors. On her very first morning, a clumsy accident turned into a confrontation no one expected. A single spark of defiance lit the fuse of a battle between David and Goliath, except this time, Goliath wasn't prepared for the courage of the underdog. But here's the question: can one woman's honesty and compassion change not only a company, but the heart of a man who had forgotten what it meant to care? And when secrets from the past collide with betrayals in the present, will courage be enough to save them all? Stay with us, because this is not just a love story. It is a story of power, pain, redemption, and the reminder that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the greatest strength. If this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. Emma Caldwell had rehearsed this morning in her mind 100 times. She told herself she would walk through the tall glass doors of Pierce Industries with calm, confident steps. She would smile at the receptionist, greet her new colleagues warmly, and start her first day as smoothly as a well-oiled machine. But reality, as it often does, had other plans. The September air in Chicago carried that in-between chill, too warm for a heavy coat, too cool for bare arms. Emma balanced her purse on one shoulder and a small cardboard tray with 2 cups of coffee in her hands. One cup was hers. The other she had decided to bring for her new boss, Jonathan Pierce, the man whose name carried both fear and admiration in the corporate world. She had read about him in the newspapers. A millionaire CEO who had built Pierce Industries into one of the most profitable companies in the Midwest. Articles described him as brilliant, ruthless, and nearly untouchable. Employees described him differently: cold as marble, sharp as a blade, and entirely unforgiving. Emma knew all of that, but she believed in small gestures. Maybe, just maybe, a cup of good coffee could soften a hard edge. The lobby of Pierce Industries was everything one would expect from a company led by a man like Jonathan Pierce. Tall ceilings, white marble floors, glass panels that gleamed under bright lights. People moved through the space with quiet urgency, heads down, voices low, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the order of things. "Excuse me. Sorry. Coming through," Emma murmured as she tried to weave her way around a group of employees who seemed to walk no faster than turtles. Her shoes clicked on the polished floor, a sound that echoed louder than she wanted. She clutched the tray of coffee as though it were precious cargo, and then disaster. Her left heel slid across the slick marble. It happened so quickly she had no time to think, only to flail. The tray tipping forward, the 2 cups arching gracefully through the air. And as fate would have it, they landed on the last person she ever wanted to see. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit had been striding across the lobby, his expression unreadable, his presence commanding enough to make people part like the Red Sea before him. Jonathan Pierce. Both coffees splashed across his shirt front and tie, staining the expensive fabric with wide brown blotches. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. The lobby went silent. Even the security guard at the far desk looked up from his phone. Emma froze. Her cheeks burned, her chest tightened, and for a long moment she couldn't breathe. She looked from the dripping stain on his chest to his face. Jonathan's gaze followed her movement, first down at the coffee spreading across his suit, then back up to her wide, terrified eyes. His jaw clenched. The silence between them felt heavier than the marble pillars surrounding them. Emma did the worst thing she could possibly do. She spoke. "Well," she blurted out, her voice trembling yet carrying a hint of humor she hadn't meant to reveal. "At least it matches your suit, and it's premium roast. Only the best." The gasp that swept across the lobby was audible. A secretary nearby pressed a hand to her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my lord." Jonathan Pierce narrowed his eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady, like a blade sliding from its sheath. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Emma swallowed hard. Yes. I spilled coffee on your suit, but technically, I increased its value. You know, with premium coffee. She gave a nervous smile, the kind that appeared when panic met stubborn courage. The corner of his mouth twitched, but it wasn't a smile. This suit, he said slowly, is custom made in Italy. It costs more than your annual salary. Emma bit her lip. Her heart was pounding so loudly she wondered if everyone could hear it. But some small ember of defiance flared inside her. Well, she said softly, look on the bright side. At least now you smell approachable. A ripple of shocked laughter escaped from the group of employees. Quickly, they tried to smother it, but the sound was already loose in the air. Jonathan stepped closer, towering over her. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the sharp bitterness of coffee, a clash of power and accident. Your name, he demanded. Emma straightened her shoulders, though her knees felt like water. Emma Caldwell, your new secretary. Something flickered in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or disbelief. Then his face hardened again. Perfect. Day one. And you're already on my list. He turned, his ruined tie swinging slightly as he walked toward the elevators. Over his shoulder, he said, My office? 10 minutes, and bring a cloth. Emma blinked, unsure if he was serious or simply cruel. But he didn't look back. As soon as he disappeared, whispers filled the lobby like birds taking flight. You're done, someone whispered. She lasted 10 minutes. Another chuckled nervously. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, leaned over her counter and murmured with a smile, Well, Ms. Caldwell, you've just made history. Emma let out a shaky sigh, crouched to pick up the empty tray, and muttered under her breath, Welcome to the dream job. Emma? The elevator ride to the 27th floor felt like an eternity. Emma Caldwell clutched the cloth she had grabbed from the supply closet as though it were a shield. Each soft ding of the passing floors echoed inside her chest, and with every second she rehearsed a dozen explanations that all sounded equally hopeless. By the time the elevator doors opened, her heart was beating so fast she thought she might faint. The hallway stretched before her like the aisle of a courtroom, employees turning discreet glances her way, as if they were waiting to see a sentence carried out. Jonathan Pierce's office door stood open. He was by the window, his tall frame silhouetted against the steel-gray sky over Chicago. Come in, he said without turning. His voice was calm, but edged with authority. Emma stepped forward cautiously. Mr. Pierce, I'm truly sorry about earlier. The coffee. It wasn't how I planned my first day. He turned slowly. The stain on his suit remained, but his eyes were clear, sharp, assessing. Impressions, he said, are made with work, not accidents. He glanced briefly at the cloth in her hand, and certainly not with lattes. Emma forced a small smile. So, no donuts tomorrow either. For the briefest moment. Something twitched in his expression, perhaps amusement, but it vanished quickly. He set a thick folder on his desk and pushed it toward her. Work for today. Let's see if you're better at typing than at carrying coffee. Emma reached for the folder. Her fingers brushed against the stack of papers inside. Easily 1,000 documents. She raised her brows. Is this all for today? Yes, he replied smoothly. And I expect them organized, alphabetically, chronologically, and by relevance. Deadline noon. Her mouth fell open slightly. Noon, Mr. Pierce. There are over 1,000 files here. Your problem, not mine. He picked up another sheet as if he were already too busy to continue. Emma hesitated, then said quietly, Fine. But just so we're clear, do you want them sorted by color too? Maybe by paper thickness. His eyes snapped up, cold and sharp. Do not test me, Ms. Caldwell. She pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. It wasn't fearlessness that kept her standing tall. It was the absurdity of the demand. She gave a little nod, lifted the folder, and turned toward the door. "And Ms. Caldwell," he added, just as she reached the threshold. "Yes, one more thing." He leaned back in his chair. "By 5 o'clock, I need a detailed report on the productivity of the third-floor staff. Today only, and..." He paused, savoring the words. "I'll need one silver paper clip. Just one, not gold, not chrome. Silver." Emma blinked. "A silver paper clip. That's correct." His face betrayed nothing. She tilted her head, studying him. Was this a test? A joke or a punishment? "May I ask what for?" "No," he said firmly. "You may go." Emma walked back down the hallway, the heavy folder pressing against her side. She caught the looks of her co-workers, sympathy from some, amusement from others. In the elevator, she exhaled a long breath. "All right, Jonathan Pierce," she muttered. "You want war, you'll get war." 2 hours later, Jonathan returned to his office after a meeting, only to stop in the doorway at the sound of a strange metallic clatter. It was like coins spilling across a table. His gaze swept the room and froze. His desk was covered, absolutely buried, in silver paper clips, thousands of them, scattered like shiny confetti across every surface. On the pile sat a small note, written in neat handwriting. "Hope one of these works for your extremely important presentation. Yours sincerely, Emma Caldwell." At the far side of the desk, Emma stood calmly, arms folded, a sly smile curving her lips. "I brought all I could find. You can pick the best one." Jonathan stared, speechless for once. Beyond the glass walls, several employees lingered, trying not to laugh but failing miserably. Their eyes flicked between Emma's smug posture and Jonathan's stunned silence. Where did you even..." He stopped, unable to form the question. Emma shrugged lightly. "I borrowed them. Accounting had a few, legal had more. Even IT contributed. Everyone was happy to help when they heard it was for Jonathan Pierce's silver paper clip emergency." Jonathan narrowed his eyes, but before he could respond, Emma placed another folder neatly on the one uncluttered corner of his desk. "And here's the productivity report, with colorful charts. Turns out the third floor works 23% better with decent coffee and background music." She stood tall, waiting. He flipped through the folder, skimming pages filled with meticulous graphs, notes, and calculations. It was impeccable. He looked up, conflicted, irritated, yet reluctantly impressed. And the files he asked, alphabetical, chronological, by relevance, by cover color, and by thickness. Emma said, without missing a beat. "You never know when that might come in handy." For a long moment, silence filled the office, broken only by the sound of paper clips sliding to the floor when he tried to move a document. "You did all this in one morning?" he asked finally. Emma glanced at her watch. Yes, and still had time for lunch. "By the way, there are sandwiches in the kitchen. Help yourself." Murmurs rippled through the small crowd outside. A few hands covered mouths to hide grins. Jonathan closed the folder slowly. His jaw worked, but words didn't come easily. At last, he leaned back, steepling his fingers, and said, "Tomorrow, Ms. Caldwell. I expect a clean desk." "Of course, Mr. Pierce," she replied sweetly. "And just to clarify, would you like regular coffee? Or shall I prepare another gourmet experiment?" The faintest twitch tugged at the corner of his mouth. He quickly smoothed it away. "You may go," he said, voice tight. Emma picked up her bag, nodded politely, and left the room with steady steps. Jonathan sat alone among 10,000 silver paper clips, a CEO who suddenly found utterly outmaneuvered by a secretary on her very first day. And though he wouldn't himself ever admit it, a small, unwelcome thought crept into his mind. He was starting to pay attention. The following Monday, The sky over Pierce Industries was gray, heavy with the threat of rain. Emma walked into Chicago, Industries with her shoulders squared, a decision already sealed in her heart. David Langston's offer still lingered in her mind like a sweet perfume, enticing, flattering, almost impossible to ignore. Yet, over the weekend, she had realized something simple. Her story wasn't finished here. Not with these people. Not with Jonathan. When she stepped off the elevator, she was met with the usual hush of conversations, the sideways glances that had followed her since her very first day. But something inside her had shifted. She no longer felt like an outsider bracing for judgment. She felt like someone who belonged. Jonathan was waiting in his office, pacing. He had spent 2 nights rehearsing what he might say if she left and what he might say if she stayed. The uncertainty had eaten at him worse than any investor call. When Emma appeared at the door, he froze, his throat suddenly dry. "Good morning," she said, her tone calm, steady. "Emma?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the storm inside. Have you decided?" She nodded, stepping into the office. "I did." The pause stretched until she finally continued. "I'm staying." Jonathan blinked, as if he hadn't heard right. You're staying." "Yes." She allowed herself a small smile. "Because I believe in this company, and because, despite everything, I believe in you." Relief flooded his face, but she raised a hand before he could speak. "But Jonathan, if I'm going to stay, things have to change. Not just between us, but for everyone who works here. This place can't survive on fear anymore." Her words struck him harder than any investor critique. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at the woman who had once spilled coffee on his $1,000 suit, and who now held the power to reshape his entire world. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're right. Fear built this empire, but it won't sustain it. Not anymore." That afternoon, the company gathered in the auditorium for an unscheduled meeting. Employees whispered nervously, some fearing layoffs, others expecting another stern lecture. Jonathan stood at the podium, but this time, his expression was different, less severe, more human. Emma stood to the side, her quiet presence steadying him. "I owe you all an apology," Jonathan began, his voice echoing through the room. "For too long, I believed results mattered more than people. I cut corners, cut benefits, and cut away at the spirit of this place. That ends today." Gasps rippled through the audience. "Effective immediately," he continued. "All employee benefits will be restored. Healthcare, transportation, food allowances, the works, and more than that. We're launching new wellness programs to make this company not just profitable, but livable." Silence followed, then murmurs, then applause that grew into thunderous clapping. Some employees even stood. Emma felt her throat tighten as she watched faces light up. Mary from the cleaning crew, Ethan from accounting, Sandra from IT. For the first time, Chicago Industries felt alive. After the meeting, Emma found Jonathan in his office, loosening his tie. He looked exhausted, but lighter, as if he had set down a burden he'd carried for years. "That was brave," she told him. He gave a wry smile. "It was overdue. You were right all along, Emma. They're not just employees. They're people, and they deserve better than what I've given them." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "And what about us?" Jonathan's eyes searched hers. For once, there was no mask, no armor, only a man stripped bare of pretense. "I don't just need you here as part of the company," he said quietly. "I need you in my life. Not because you fix my mistakes or make me look good, but because with you, I finally remember what it feels like to be human." Emma's breath caught. For weeks, she had waited for him to say something that wasn't tangled in pride or half-phrased commands. And now, here it was. Simple, vulnerable, real. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "Took you long enough?" Jonathan chuckled, then reached for her hand. She let him, the warmth of his palm grounding her. News traveled fast through the building. By the end of the week, it wasn't just the restored benefits or the new wellness programs people whispered about. It was the sight of Jonathan and Emma walking side by side, no longer CEO and secretary locked in silent battle, but partners. At first, some employees were shocked, others teased. But gradually, laughter replaced fear in the halls, and Chicago Industries began to feel less like a fortress and more like a community. One Friday afternoon, Mary found Emma in the kitchen and handed her a small bouquet of daisies. "For you," she said shyly, "because you changed everything." Emma's eyes glistened as she accepted the flowers. "Not just me," she replied, glancing toward Jonathan, who was across the room talking to Ethan with a rare, genuine smile. "We did this together." That night, as the rain finally fell over Pierce Industries, Jonathan and Emma walked out of the building together. He carried her umbrella, even though it barely covered his tall frame. And when she teased him about it, he just laughed, on the sidewalk, under the glow of the street lamps. He turned to her. "You know," he said, "for years I thought strength meant control, power, never showing weakness. But you taught me that strength is also about caring, about letting people in." Emma tilted her head, her smile tender, "and about spilling coffee once in a while." He laughed, shaking his head. "I'll never live that down, will I not a chance?" The rain pattered softly around them as he leaned closer, his voice low. "Emma Whitmore, you've changed everything for me, and I don't want to hide it anymore." Before she could answer, he kissed her, not rushed, not desperate, but steady and sure. A promise. When they pulled apart, Emma whispered, "Finally." And for the first time, Jonathan Chicago felt like a man who had not just won back his company, but his heart. The mahogany boardroom table gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lights. Around it sat 6 investors, men and women whose signatures could shift the direction of entire industries. Jonathan Pierce stood at the head of the table, tall, confident, his navy suit as precise as his posture. "This quarter," he began, clicking the remote in his hand, "Pierce Industries has seen 15% growth across all strategic divisions." A colorful chart filled the large screen at the end of the room. Lines soared upward, numbers glittered in bold type. Jonathan's voice carried that calm, measured authority that had convinced investors for years. Emma Caldwell sat quietly near the door, a notepad in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be in the room. Jonathan had asked her to deliver folders and then leave, but one of the investors had smiled at her and asked if she would stay to take notes. Jonathan had frowned but said nothing. Now she sat there, listening as he spoke with polished assurance. "Efficiency," Jonathan continued, "is our foundation. Every team is selected with precision, every dollar accounted for, every process optimized." The investors nodded, pens scratching across paper, murmurs of approval filling the air. Jonathan was in his element, weaving numbers into a narrative of triumph. Emma flipped through the handouts she had distributed earlier, scanning the columns of figures. At first she wasn't looking for anything, just occupying her hands so she wouldn't feel out of place. But then she noticed something. Her brow furrowed. A calculation in the third quarter column didn't add up. The total showed 15%, but the individual numbers, well, if she added them properly, they came closer to 12. Her heart quickened. Surely she was mistaken. She checked again. She wrote the numbers on her notepad, carried the twos, aligned the decimals. The answer remained the same, 12.3% growth, not 15. Jonathan's voice rolled on. "As you can see, our upward trend places us above competitors in every comparable market." Emma felt a debate raging inside her. She could stay silent. No one expected a secretary to correct the CEO. Or she could speak, knowing full well that Jonathan Pierce would likely flay her alive with a look. But truth was truth, and Emma had promised herself she wouldn't just survive in this company. She would stand for something. She raised her hand slightly, then lowered it, nerves trembling through her arm. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said softly. Every head turned. The investors looked at her with mild surprise. Jonathan turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as though he'd just heard a bird sing in a courtroom. "Yes, Ms. Caldwell." His tone was polite enough for the room, but edged with warning. Emma lifted the report in her hands. "I believe there's a miscalculation here. The growth is impressive, but the actual figure should be 12.3%, not 15. The silence that followed was suffocating. One of the investors, Margaret Fields, leaned forward, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "Are you certain?" Emma nodded, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Yes, ma'am. I double-checked. The decimals in the third quarter totals were rounded incorrectly. When you add them across departments, it inflates the final number." She stood, almost without realizing it, and walked to the screen. "Here," she said, pointing with her pen. "If you break it down, department by department, and adjust for margins of error, the accurate number is 12.3. Still a healthy growth, but a more realistic picture." The investors shifted in their seats, studying the documents again. Pens moved quickly, notes scribbled, Jonathan's jaw tightened. "This is not the time for—" But Margaret cut him off gently. "No, Mr. Pierce, this is precisely the time. Transparency matters. Thank you, Ms. Caldwell." Another investor, Thomas Whitman, gave a short chuckle. "I'd rather have an honest 12% than a dressed-up 15. Laughter rippled softly around the table. Jonathan stood frozen, his hand still on the remote, the numbers on the screen suddenly fragile under scrutiny. Emma stepped back, her cheeks burning, but she kept her chin high. Jonathan clicked the remote again, moving the slide forward, but his voice no longer carried the same effortless authority. "As I was saying," the investors listened politely, but their eyes drifted toward Emma every so often, as if she had just introduced a fresh wind into a stale room. When the presentation ended, the investors rose, shaking hands, offering congratulations. But it wasn't only Jonathan they praised. That was sharp observation. Margaret said to Emma, "How long have you been with the company?" Emma smiled awkwardly. 3 days. 3 days," Margaret repeated with a laugh, "and already making a difference." Thomas clapped Jonathan on the shoulder. "You've got yourself quite a secretary. Keep her close." Jonathan's polite smile looked more like a clenched jaw. When the room emptied, only Jonathan and Emma remained. He set the remote down with deliberate care, then turned toward her. "You had no right," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Emma met his gaze. "I had the truth. If I'd stayed silent, you'd have misled them." His eyes burned with anger, but underneath, she caught something else: reluctant respect, perhaps, or the faintest trace of curiosity. Jonathan Pierce was not a man used to being corrected, especially not in public. Yet Emma Caldwell had done just that, and she had done it with poise. And though he would never admit it aloud, the sting of humiliation was mixed with something he hadn't felt in a long time, someone worth noticing. By the next morning, the story had spread like perfume through an elevator, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. It began with a secretary on the 30th floor who whispered to a friend in human resources, "Did you hear the new girl corrected Mr. Pierce during the investor meeting?" By lunch, the version in accounting was more dramatic. She stood up, marched right to the screen, and told him he was wrong, in front of everyone. By mid-afternoon, maintenance staff were repeating a third version. She slapped the papers down on the table and told him to get his math straight. The truth hardly mattered anymore. What mattered was that Emma Caldwell, the new secretary, had done the unthinkable, challenged Jonathan Pierce in his own boardroom. Emma felt the weight of the whispers as she walked through the hallways. Heads turned when she passed. Some smiled as if to say good for you. Others looked at her with quiet pity, as though they were watching someone walk toward her own firing. She sat at her desk, typing up the minutes from the meeting, her stomach a knot of nerves. She hadn't meant to humiliate Jonathan. She had only wanted the truth to be clear. Yet now she wondered if her truth-telling would cost her the very job she needed. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophie, an IT legend. "Coffee on me tomorrow." Emma smiled faintly but didn't reply. She wasn't sure if she felt like a legend or a fool. Inside his office, Jonathan Pierce stood by the window, staring at the skyline without really seeing it. The city spread before him, glittering towers under a pale sky. But his mind was locked in yesterday's humiliation. No one corrected him, not in private, and certainly not in front of investors. For years, his word had been treated as law, his calculations unquestioned, and yet, in the space of a few minutes, Emma Caldwell had disrupted that order. He replayed the moment again and again, her calm voice, the way she had carried the numbers in her hand as if they weighed more than his authority. The investors nodding at her, listening, respecting her. His jaw tightened. He told himself it was arrogance on her part. A secretary should know her place. She was supposed to be an extension of his schedule, not a voice in his boardroom. And yet, Jonathan turned from the window, pacing the length of his office. Something gnawed at him, deeper than anger. It was curiosity. How had she caught the error so quickly? Why had she spoken at all? And how had she managed to stand her ground? Even under his glare, without trembling, it unsettled him. It intrigued him. And it left him with a question he couldn't easily dismiss had he underestimated her. That evening, long after most employees had gone home, Emma remained at her desk. The office was quiet now, the hum of computers fading into the background, the sound of her typing steady. She paused, rubbing her temples. She thought about Linda Morales and her story about the cut benefits. She thought about the pastries she'd brought to brighten the morning. And she thought about Jonathan, standing at the head of the boardroom table, polished and powerful, presenting numbers that weren't quite real. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just about math. It was about honesty. If he would bend numbers to impress investors, what else would he bend? Emma closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. She wasn't reckless by nature, but something inside her, something rooted deep, told her she couldn't work here and keep her head down like everyone else. She wanted to survive, yes, but more than that, she wanted to matter. Meanwhile, Jonathan had not left his office either. He sat behind his desk, staring at a file he hadn't turned a page of in half an hour. His thoughts circled the same orbit Caldwell. He told himself she was reckless, unprofessional, but another voice whispered that maybe she had done what no one else had dared, held up a mirror to him. He remembered her words, still a healthy growth, but a more realistic picture. Realistic. He hated that word. It lacked ambition, lacked fire, and yet it was true. For the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce felt something shift inside him. He didn't like it, but he couldn't deny it. The whispers continued into the next day. James from security passed the front desk, shaking his head. "She's got guts. I'll give her that." Sandra in payroll whispered back. "She's also got a target on her back. Pierce won't let that slide." And in the kitchen, when Emma walked in to refill her water bottle, the room fell silent for a moment before someone muttered, "That's her." Emma felt the eyes on her, the unspoken questions. Would she last the week? Would Jonathan fire her? Or had she, somehow, planted a seed none of them could see yet? She carried her water back to her desk, her face calm, but inside her heart pounded with the weight of both fear and conviction. She knew one thing for certain: she couldn't go back to being invisible. The office was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that made the air feel thicker, heavier. Most of the staff had gone home hours ago, leaving only the hum of the building's ventilation and the faint glow of lights left on in the executive floor. Emma Caldwell had stayed late, finishing up a stack of correspondence Jonathan had asked her to prepare. She told herself she was being diligent, but part of her knew it was more than that. Staying late gave her time to breathe without the constant weight of watchful eyes. As she carried the last folder into Jonathan's office, she noticed the room looked different when it wasn't buzzing with activity. Without him in it, the space felt less like a fortress and more like a stage after the actors had gone home. She placed the folder on his desk, meaning to leave quickly. But then her eyes caught something unusual. A drawer in the credenza along the wall had been left slightly open. It was unlike Jonathan, he was meticulous to a fault. She hesitated, telling herself it wasn't her business, yet curiosity tugged harder than caution. She stepped closer and gently pushed the drawer back in place. But before it clicked shut, a corner of a photo peeked out from under a stack of papers. Emma froze. It wasn't a recent corporate headshot or a glossy magazine cover. It was a faded photograph, the edges curling with age. She pulled it out carefully. The picture showed a boy, maybe 10 years old, standing in front of an elaborate birthday cake. Balloons floated in the background. Streamers hung in neat lines. The table groaned with gifts wrapped in shiny paper. But what struck Emma most wasn't what was there. It was what was missing. There were no other children, no friends clustered around, no laughing faces, just one boy in a pressed shirt, his hands at his sides, his eyes staring directly into the camera with a seriousness that didn't belong to a child. Jonathan Pierce. Emma's chest tightened. She turned the photo over. On the back, written in a sharp hand, were 2 words, 10th birthday, nothing more. No message of love, no note from a parent, no memory shared. She placed the photo back exactly as she found it, but her mind couldn't let it go. The next day, she saw Jonathan differently. When he walked through the office, tall and commanding, issuing orders with clipped precision, she couldn't stop seeing the boy in the photograph. At lunch, when employees ducked their heads as he passed, she wondered if that boy had once ducked his own head at the absence of affection. She began to notice small things, the way he avoided small talk, as if words without purpose were foreign to him, the way he stiffened when someone laughed too loudly, as if joy made him uneasy, the way his office walls were lined with awards and plaques, but not a single personal picture. Emma sat at her desk that afternoon, her thoughts restless. Jonathan wasn't just cold by choice, he had been shaped into it. That evening, she gathered her courage and lingered outside his office as he finished a phone call. His voice was firm, controlled, every syllable measured. When he hung up, he noticed her. Yes, Ms. Caldwell. His eyes narrowed slightly, wary of interruptions. I wanted to ask. Emma hesitated, then chose her words carefully. Do you ever take breaks? You've been in here since 7 this morning. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Breaks are for people who can afford wasted time. Emma studied him. Or for people who remember they're human. For the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes. A crack in the marble, a shadow of the boy in the photo. But it vanished quickly. Was there a point to this conversation, he asked, his tone clipped again? Emma smiled faintly. Maybe just a reminder. Even machines break down if you don't take care of them. Jonathan's lips pressed into a line. He didn't respond. But as Emma turned to leave, she could feel his gaze linger on her, longer than usual. That night, Emma lay awake in her small apartment, the image of the lonely birthday boy vivid in her mind. She thought about Linda's confession, the cut benefits, the fear that gripped the employees. And she thought about Jonathan Pierce, Untouchable CEO. Yes, but also once a child who had blown out candles in an empty room. For the first time, she wondered if beneath all his armor, there was still a person who longed to be seen. Emma Caldwell arrived at the office before sunrise. The streets of Chicago were still damp from last night's rain, and the city felt hushed, waiting for the day to begin. In her arms she carried 2 large boxes, one balanced precariously against her hip, the other gripped firmly in her hands. Inside the boxes, golden waffles, warm pastries, and thermoses of real coffee rich, aromatic, the kind that woke you up before the first sip. She had decided to call it Operation Sunshine Breakfast. By 7:30, when the first sleepy-eyed employees wandered into the building, the kitchen on the 27th floor had been transformed. Emma had set out plates of waffles with small cups of maple syrup, arranged croissants in neat rows, and filled the air with the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee. The effect was immediate. "Good morning," Emma chirped as Sandra from payroll shuffled in. "Try one of these. They're still warm. Sandra blinked, then laughed, covering her mouth. Waffles. At the office? Why not? Emma replied, if we're going to face spreadsheets and deadlines, we may as well do it with syrup. Within half an hour, word had spread across the floor. People trickled into the kitchen, drawn by curiosity and the irresistible smell. Soon, the quiet, somber office kitchen turned into something entirely new, a place of chatter, laughter, and shared plates. James from security leaned against the counter, sipping coffee. This is better than the sludge in the machine downstairs, he said, earning chuckles from the group. Tom from marketing raised his waffle like a toast. To Ms. Caldwell, the only reason I came in today with a smile? Emma laughed, though a part of her felt a tug in her chest. She hadn't done much just breakfast, but already the atmosphere was different. People stood taller, voices grew lighter, as if a heavy fog had lifted. The spell broke when Jonathan Pierce appeared in the doorway. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to hush the room. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The smell of maple syrup suddenly seemed out of place under his sharp gaze. Ms. Caldwell, he said, his voice smooth but laced with steel. My office. Now? Emma swallowed, set down her coffee, and walked toward him. But instead of leading her into his office, Jonathan stopped in the hallway. Turning to face her, the glass walls reflected the tension between them, a silent stage where employees pretended to type while stealing glances. What exactly do you think you're doing? He asked, his voice low. Breakfast, Emma replied evenly. This isn't a diner, it's a workplace. You've disrupted the entire floor. Emma folded her arms, holding her ground. I gave people a reason to feel human before diving into another 10-hour day. That's not disruption, that's care. Jonathan's eyes flashed. Care doesn't increase profit margins, and fear doesn't increase loyalty, Emma countered. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Emma could feel the eyes of her colleagues behind the walls, waiting, watching. Jonathan stepped closer, his height casting a shadow across her. You don't get to redefine how this company runs. Emma's voice softened, but her gaze never wavered. Maybe not, but I can remind people that they matter. For a moment, Jonathan said nothing. His jaw tightened, his hands curled slightly at his sides. To any outsider, it looked like anger. But Emma thought just for a fleeting second she saw something else in his expression. Unease. He turned abruptly. End this circus! Immediately! Emma let him walk away without answering. She knew the waffles would be gone before noon anyway, but the warmth they left behind that couldn't be erased. Back in the kitchen, employees whispered quietly. He looked furious. Sandra muttered. Yeah, Tom added, but she didn't back down. James shook his head, a grin tugging at his lips. I think Caldwell just declared war. Emma returned to her desk, her heart pounding. Her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled papers, but she forced herself to breathe. She hadn't planned on open defiance, but the truth was, something about Jonathan's coldness made her push back harder. She thought of Linda Morales, of cut benefits and tired eyes. She thought of the lonely boy in that photograph, and she thought of the employees laughing over waffles this morning, the kind of laughter that hadn't been heard in that office in months. Emma knew this was just the beginning. Jonathan Pierce wanted order. She wanted humanity, and neither of them seemed willing to surrender. It began with a rumor. Emma first overheard it in the break room, spoken in hushed tones by two analysts who immediately fell silent when she walked in. Later, she caught a fragment in the elevator, something about auditors and irregularities. By the end of the day, the whispers had coalesced into something undeniable. Pierce Industries was under investigation for possible financial misconduct. When she returned to her desk, the tension in the building was almost visible. Employees walked quickly, eyes down, conversations cut short as soon as doors opened. The laughter of yesterday's waffles felt like a distant memory. Jonathan Pierce sat in his office, his face pale under the sharp light. For once, his usual mask of control seemed cracked, On his desk lay a thick packet of documents stamped with a government seal. He flipped through page after page, his jaw tightening with each line. The words stared back at him, suspicion of fraudulent reporting. If proven, it wouldn't just be a financial penalty. It could destroy everything his company, his reputation, his legacy. Emma knocked lightly on the glass door before stepping inside. "Mr. Pierce, I heard." She hesitated. "Is it true?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His eyes were sharp but tired, a storm contained behind steel. "They think we cooked the books," he said finally, his voice flat. "They think I've built this empire on lies." Emma's stomach tightened. "Did you?" His eyes flicked to hers, startled by her bluntness. For a moment, the cold CEO facade almost slipped. "No," he said firmly. "I've pushed limits, yes, but fraud, no." His voice carried both conviction and exhaustion. "The problem is, someone in this building wants it to look like I did." He shoved the packet of papers across the desk toward her. "The numbers are a trap. Caldwell, someone's burying false data in the system, and the investigators will use it to tear me apart." Emma opened the folder, scanning the figures. She recognized patterns, strange inconsistencies in the ledgers. Whoever had done this was clever. They hadn't made obvious mistakes. The errors were small but consistent, like drops of poison in a glass of water. Who would do this, she asked. Jonathan's face darkened. Someone who knows the system. Someone close. For the first time since she'd met him, Jonathan Pierce looked less like a titan of industry and more like a man cornered. He leaned forward, his voice lower now. "I need you to help me." Emma blinked. "Me. You see things others miss. You proved that in the boardroom." His jaw tightened as if the admission pained him. Then he exhaled, and the single word that followed landed heavier than anything she had ever heard from him. "Please." Emma froze. In all her days at Pierce Industries, she had never imagined hearing Jonathan Pierce say please. It was like watching a statue bend. Something inside her softened. She saw not the ruthless CEO, but the boy from the faded photograph, the boy who had learned to survive alone, who now faced losing everything he had built. "All right," she said quietly. "Show me where to start." For the next 3 hours, they sat side by side in his office, poring over spreadsheets and financial statements. The silence between them wasn't hostile this time. It was heavy with concentration. Emma pointed out discrepancies. Jonathan explained the corporate structures behind them. Once, she caught him glancing at her, as if still surprised she was there, shoulder to shoulder with him instead of across the table. At one point, Emma leaned back, rubbing her temples. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They buried the false entries just deep enough that no one would notice unless they cared to look. Jonathan's lips pressed thin. "Mark Williams," he muttered. "He oversees the reporting chains. He has the access." Emma remembered the name. Mark, the CFO who smiled like a politician at meetings, who had once clapped Jonathan on the back with an ease no one else dared. "Why would he sabotage you?" she asked. Jonathan didn't answer right away. He stared at the numbers as though they were ghosts from his past. "Finally," he said, "because once upon a time, he knew me better than anyone, and that makes him dangerous." By midnight, they had traced enough anomalies to see the pattern clearly. Emma pushed back from the desk, exhaustion pulling at her. "We can prove this," she said. "If we keep going, we can show the investigators exactly where the false data starts. It won't hold." Jonathan nodded slowly. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man on a pedestal. He looked like someone carrying a weight too heavy for one pair of shoulders. "Thank you," he said softly. No steel, no arrogance, just gratitude. Emma stood, gathering her notes. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." She hesitated at the door, then added, "But you're not alone in this, Mr. Pierce." "Not anymore." Jonathan watched her leave, the words echoing in his mind long after the hallway swallowed her footsteps. not alone. It was a concept he had almost forgotten. The following week, Emma buried herself in spreadsheets, transaction logs, and archived statements. The deeper she dug, the clearer the trail became. At first, the discrepancies seemed random in entry here, a miscalculation there, but when she mapped them across departments, the pattern emerged. It all traced back to one signature: Mark Williams, Chief Financial Officer. Emma sat at her desk late one evening, the glow of her monitor casting long shadows on the wall. Her heart pounded as she highlighted yet another suspicious transfer funds rerouted through shell vendors, numbers padded just enough to tilt quarterly reports upward, and every document bore the same authorizing initials: M. W. She pushed back in her chair, rubbing her temples. It was undeniable now. The man responsible wasn't a faceless outsider. It was someone at the very top of the company. Jonathan's office door stood open. He was pacing, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened a rare crack in his usually immaculate armor. Emma stepped inside, clutching the printed spreadsheets. "I found it," she said softly. He stopped, turning toward her. The sharpness in his eyes softened when he saw the gravity in her face. "Show me." She spread the papers across his desk, pointing to the trail of numbers. Here and here, every false entry, every misreport, they all lead back to Mark Williams. For a moment, Jonathan didn't move. His gaze dropped to the papers, scanning the evidence, but his mind seemed to wander elsewhere. His hands, usually steady, clenched slightly on the edge of the desk. "Mark," he whispered. Emma hesitated. "You sound like you knew this was possible." Jonathan let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. He walked to the window, staring out at the city lights shimmering against the night sky. Possible? No, not him. He fell silent, his shoulders tense, as if holding back a tide of memory. Finally, he spoke. "We grew up together. Same neighborhood, same school. He was my only friend." Emma's chest tightened. She hadn't expected this. "My father was never home," Jonathan continued, his voice lower now, heavy with something raw. "My mother cared more about appearances than affection. Every birthday party was a performance for adult champagne, investors, neighbors, but never anyone my age. Except Mark. He came every year. He was the only one who stayed." Emma remembered the faded photograph of the lonely birthday boy. Now she could imagine Mark standing just outside the frame. "He believed in me," Jonathan said, his voice breaking ever so slightly. "When everyone else called me arrogant, he called me ambitious. When I told him I'd build something great, he said he'd stand by me." He turned back to Emma, his eyes dark with betrayal. "And now I see his signature on the very papers designed to destroy me." Emma stepped closer. "Jonathan, I know this hurts, but you can't ignore it. If the investigators uncover this before we do, you'll take the fall." His jaw tightened, torn between fury and grief. "I trusted him with everything. My company, my reputation, my—" He stopped, swallowing hard, and he used that trust like a weapon. For the first time, Emma saw him not as the untouchable CEO, but as a man gutted by loss. His authority, his wealth, his power, none of it shielded him from this particular wound. Silence filled the office. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside. Emma spoke gently. "We can still stop this, but you need to decide, are you willing to fight him, even if it means exposing the past?" Jonathan looked down at the papers again. His hand hovered above Mark's initials, trembling ever so slightly. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough. "I don't know if I'm ready to see him as an enemy." Emma laid a hand on the desk, not touching him, but close enough to offer steadiness. "Sometimes the hardest battles are with the people we once loved." Jonathan's gaze met hers. For a fleeting second, the mask slipped entirely. She saw the boy who had longed for loyalty, the man who had built walls so high to avoid this very moment. And then, with a slow exhale, he straightened his shoulders. "If Mark thinks he can break me, he's wrong. He may have been my only friend once, But now, he's my greatest threat. Emma nodded, though her heart ached for him. She knew this wasn't just about numbers anymore. This was about betrayal carved deep into the bone. That night, long after Emma left, Jonathan remained in his office. He stared at the city lights, remembering two boys running through cracked sidewalks, sharing secrets of futures they barely understood. He remembered laughter that had once felt like salvation. And now, he remembered signatures on spreadsheets that could end everything. For the first time in years, Jonathan Pierce felt truly alone. The ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the hum of money disguised as philanthropy. The annual St. Helena's art auction was less about charity and more about reputation. Business magnates, investors, and old families filled the room. Each handshake a transaction, each smile a negotiation. Emma smoothed the folds of her navy dress, the kind that looks simple until you notice the quiet elegance of its cut. She wasn't used to evenings like this. Her world had always been practical paychecks, grocery lists, and coffee breaks. Yet here she was, standing at the arm of Jonathan Pierce, the man most people only whispered about. "Ready?" Jonathan asked, offering his arm. His tuxedo was perfect, but his posture betrayed tension. He looked like a soldier headed to war rather than a man escorting a woman into a ballroom. Emma slipped her hand into the crook of his arm. "You need to relax," she whispered. "Remember, tonight you're not the fearsome CEO. You're just a man with his date." His brow furrowed. "I don't play roles well." "That's obvious," she teased, her smile tugging at his lips. "But lucky for you, I do. Just follow my lead." As they entered, eyes turned, murmurs rippled across the room. Pierce never attended with a companion, never smiled at anyone unless it was calculated. Yet here he was, walking in with a woman who looked at him not with fear, but with quiet assurance. Emma leaned close, whispering, "People are staring. They always stare," Jonathan muttered. "No," she corrected softly. "They're staring because you don't look untouchable tonight. You look human." The comment unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. They moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, but beneath the surface charm, Emma kept her eyes sharp. They weren't here for small talk. They were here for evidence clues about Mark Williams's ties to the shadowy consulting firm, siphoning money from Pierce Industries. She spotted a familiar name on the donor list displayed at the check-in table, Hartwell and Associates, the same consulting firm buried in the fraudulent transactions. "Jonathan," she murmured, discreetly nodding toward the sign. He followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. Of course, he's here. Emma felt his arm tense beneath her hand. She squeezed gently. "Breathe. If you look like you're hunting, he'll know." Jonathan glanced down at her. For a second, her calm steadied him. He exhaled, "Lead the way." Then, the evening unfolded like a delicate dance. They mingled with donors, admired overpriced paintings, pretended to sip champagne while scanning for opportunities. Emma slipped questions into conversations with ease, disarming people with her warmth. Jonathan marveled silently at her ability to draw out information that no spreadsheet could ever reveal. At one point, they paused near a display of impressionist landscapes. Emma tilted her head, studying the brushstrokes. "Do you like it?" Jonathan asked, more to fill the silence than out of genuine interest. She smiled faintly. "It feels alive, like the painter wanted to capture movement, not perfection." Jonathan looked at her instead of the painting. For once, he allowed himself to admit perfection had never moved him. But this woman beside him did. When the orchestra began playing, couples drifted onto the dance floor. Emma nudged him. "Our cover won't hold if we stand here like statues. Time to dance." Jonathan's eyes widened slightly. "I don't dance. Everyone dances," she said firmly, tugging him toward the floor. He resisted for a moment, but finally relented. His hand found her waist, stiff at first, as though afraid of doing something wrong. Emma guided his other hand into hers. "It's not about steps. It's about trust. The music swelled, slowly, his movements loosened. Awkwardness gave way to rhythm, tension to flow. He wasn't graceful, but he was trying, and for Jonathan Pierce, trying was more vulnerable than anything. Emma smiled up at him. See, not so terrible. He looked down, a rare hint of sheepishness in his eyes. I suppose it could be worse. They moved together in slow circles, and for the first time, Jonathan felt the weight of the world lift. Just a fraction. But the illusion broke when a voice cut through the music. Jonathan Pierce said a smooth, familiar tone. They turned. Mark Williams stood at the edge of the dance floor, glass of wine in hand, smile practiced to perfection. Emma felt Jonathan's body tense instantly. His grip on her hand tightened. Mark, Jonathan replied evenly. Though his voice was ice, Mark's eyes flicked to Emma. And who might this be before Jonathan could answer? Emma extended her hand gracefully. Emma Caldwell. I work with Jonathan. Mark kissed her hand lightly. Lucky man. You've made quite the impression in such a short time. Emma smiled politely, but inside, her instinct screamed. This was the man behind the numbers, the friend-turned-betrayer. Jonathan's voice dropped. We should talk. Privately, Mark chuckled. Of course. But tonight is about charity, isn't it? Let's not spoil the mood. His smile lingered too long, too smug, before he walked away. Jonathan's jaw tightened until Emma whispered, Not here, not now. Let's play the long game. As the evening wound down, Emma and Jonathan slipped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The night air was crisp, a relief after the tension of the ballroom. Jonathan braced his hands on the railing, staring out. I don't know if I can do this. Pretend, dance, smile while he stands there mocking me. Emma stepped beside him. You already did. You held yourself together. And no one suspects we know. He turned to her, eyes searching. How do you do it? Stay so composed, even when the ground shifts beneath you. She thought for a moment. Because I've had to. Life doesn't wait for us to feel ready. We just learn to stand, even when everything inside us wants to fall. Jonathan studied her, realizing that her strength wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, and unshakable. For the first time that night, he reached for her hand not as part of their cover, but because he needed the anchor. Emma let him. The trap had been set with precision. Emma and Jonathan spent sleepless nights drafting a mock investment proposal, numbers so tempting, so perfectly aligned with the fraudulent streams already in play, that it would be impossible for Mark Williams to resist. Emma had suggested it. If he's siphoning money, he'll take the bait. We just need to give him something to bite down on. Jonathan hated the idea of baiting someone who had once been his brother in arms, but he agreed. Pride could no longer outweigh survival. And so, they waited. The conference room became their command post. Emma coordinated with two quiet agents from the FBI, both dressed like harmless accountants, their laptops linked to surveillance systems. Jonathan stood apart, arms crossed, face pale but set like stone. Everything in place, Emma asked. Once Mr. Williams accesses the document, we'll have the trace. One agent replied. Jonathan exhaled sharply. And if he doesn't, then he's clean, Emma said softly, though she didn't believe it anymore. The wait was excruciating. Minutes dragged like hours until finally an alert pinged across the FBI's screen. Mark had logged in. They watched the cursor move, the file open, the data extracted. Seconds later, the agent gave a curt nod. We've got him. He's transmitting the information to an external server. Jonathan's fists clenched at his sides. He didn't move when the agents left to intercept. His whole body seemed to lock, as if bracing against a blow he had long suspected, but never wanted confirmed. An hour later, the office was quiet again, save for the echo of polished shoes in the hallway. Mark Williams entered the conference room, flanked by two FBI agents. His tie was askew, his face still carrying the smug confidence he had worn at the gala, though now it looked strained. Jonathan, he said smoothly, as though nothing had changed. There must be some misunderstanding. Don't. Jonathan cut in, his voice hoarse but firm. Don't call me that. Don't speak to me like we're still anything. Mark's smile faltered, but only for a second. You think I'd betray you? After everything we've built, I was protecting us. You don't understand. Emma's voice was steady. We understand perfectly. The records, the false invoices, the shell firms. We have everything. For the first time. Mark's eyes flicked to her, sharp with disdain. And who are you? The secretary. The outsider who thinks she knows what's best? Jonathan's rage erupted, not in shouting, but in a deadly calm. She's the reason I still have a company. She's the reason your lies didn't bury me alive. The words hung in the air like a gavel. The agents escorted Mark out, his protests echoing down the hall, and then silence. Jonathan stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy. Emma watched him, uncertain for a moment whether to step closer. Finally, she whispered, "Jonathan." He turned, and the mask cracked. His voice was raw, stripped of all the polish of a CEO. He was all I had. Emma. When no one else gave a damn, he did. Or at least I thought he did. Do you have any idea what it feels like to realize the only person you ever trusted was waiting for the perfect moment to destroy you? Emma's throat tightened. She did know. In her own way, different circumstances, but the same sense of betrayal. She stepped closer, her voice low and gentle. It feels like the ground has been pulled out from under you. Like everything was a lie. Jonathan's jaw trembled. He turned away, pressing a hand to his face as though ashamed of the emotion leaking through. I built walls so no one could hurt me. He was the only one I let through. And now? Emma reached out, placing her hand lightly on his arm. Now you know the walls weren't wrong, but you also know that sometimes letting someone through is worth the risk. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing the truth behind her steady gaze. She wasn't offering him pity. She was offering presence, quiet, unwavering, real. I don't know if I can trust anyone again, he admitted, the words almost breaking. You already are, Emma said softly. You trusted me. They stood in silence, the weight of betrayal thick around them. But in that silence, something shifted. Jonathan, the man who had built an empire on control and fear, leaned just slightly into Emma's steadiness. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Emma didn't promise that it would be easy, or that the pain would fade quickly. She simply stayed there beside him, her hand firm on his arm, reminding him that even in the ashes of betrayal, he wasn't alone. And in that moment, Jonathan Pierce realized something extraordinary. Strength didn't always come from standing tall. Sometimes, it came from having someone willing to stand with you. The week after Mark's arrest was a blur of press releases, emergency board meetings, and endless strategy sessions. Pierce Industries had avoided collapse by a thread, but the scars were visible. The board was restless, the employees nervous, and Jonathan more guarded than ever. And yet, through it all, Emma noticed something had changed. People looked at her differently now, not as the secretary who spilled coffee on the CEO, but as the woman who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him and uncovered the betrayal that nearly destroyed the company. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long golden beams across the glass walls of the lobby, Emma was gathering files when a tall, silver-haired man approached. His presence commanded quiet respect. People seemed to instinctively move aside as he walked. Miss Caldwell. His voice was smooth, confident. Emma turned. Yes, I'm David Harper, he said, extending his hand. Investor. Some call me the cautious type, but I prefer prudent. She shook his hand, noticing the warmth in his grip. I've heard of you. You don't usually visit in person. He smiled. Well, extraordinary circumstances bring me here, and from what I understand, you've been rather extraordinary yourself. Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. Minutes later, they sat in a quiet corner of the executive lounge. Harper leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've reviewed the reports. What you did, the way you uncovered fraud, the way you handled yourself with investors, it's impressive. Rarely do I see someone combine integrity with intelligence." Emma shifted, uncomfortable under the weight of praise. "I just did what needed to be done." "That humility," Harper said, pointing a finger lightly, "is exactly why I think you're wasting your time here." Her brows furrowed. "Wasting my time? Forgive my bluntness. But you're more than a secretary. You have the instincts of a leader, which is why I'd like to make you an offer." Emma's heart skipped. An offer? Yes. Harper & Co. is expanding. We need a director of operations, someone with sharp eyes, someone unafraid to challenge authority when necessary. The salary would be substantial, triple what you make here, with bonuses, full autonomy, your own team. Emma's mouth went dry. She had never imagined such a proposition. At that moment, Jonathan entered the lounge, speaking with another executive. His eyes landed on Harper and Emma instantly, his expression tightening. He excused himself from his companion and walked over. "David," Jonathan said, his tone polite but edged. "I didn't know you were here." Harper smiled coolly. "Jonathan, good to see you. I was just getting to know Miss Caldwell." Jonathan's eyes flicked to Emma, searching. What about Harper leaned back in his chair? About her future. She has remarkable potential, and frankly, I'm not convinced she'll realize it under your shadow. The air grew taut. Jonathan's jaw set, but before he could retort, Harper stood. "Think about it. Emma, you deserve more than coffee runs and cleaning up other people's messes. You deserve to lead." With that, he tipped his head and left, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor. The silence he left behind was heavy. Jonathan turned to Emma, his voice low. "What did he offer you?" She hesitated. "A director position, at his firm, with more money than I've ever dreamed of." Jonathan's eyes darkened, though not with anger. "Something deeper fear, perhaps? And are you considering it?" Emma folded her arms, her voice steady but tinged with conflict. "I'd be lying if I said no. It's everything I've ever wanted: stability, respect, a chance to build something of my own." Jonathan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "And what about here? What about everything we've built together these past months?" Her chest tightened. She hadn't expected the vulnerability in his words. "Jonathan, you don't own me," she said softly. "This isn't about loyalty to you. It's about my future." His gaze searched hers, unflinching. "I know. I just—" His voice faltered, rare for him. "I don't want to lose you. Not to Harper. Not to anyone." That night, Emma lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. Harper's words replayed in her mind. "You deserve to lead." For years, she had fought to prove herself, always underestimated, always placed in roles beneath her ability. And now, finally, someone powerful had seen her for who she was. But then she thought of Pierce Industries, the employees who had started smiling again because of her morning pastries, the investors who had listened when she corrected the numbers, the cleaning crew who finally had their benefits restored, and Jonathan haunted, flawed, yet trying, in his own halting way, to be better. Her heart warred with her head. If she left, she could carve out her own destiny. If she stayed, she could finish what she had started and maybe, just maybe, help Jonathan become the man he wanted to be by dawn. Emma realized something: no matter what choice she made, life would never be the same. The following morning, Emma walked into the office with her usual calm stride, but her mind was anything but calm. Harper's offer still weighed on her. Every time she looked at her desk, at the nameplate that still read "Executive Assistant," she couldn't help but hear his words echo, "You deserve more than coffee runs." As she settled in, she noticed something unusual. A bouquet of lilies, her favorite, sat neatly on her desk. She frowned, glancing around the office. No card, no note. Before she could ask, Jonathan appeared in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, except for the faintest hint of nervousness. "Morning," he said gruffly. "Morning," Emma replied, eyeing the flowers. "These yours?" He shifted uncomfortably. "A token. For your work. You've been indispensable." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Indispensable enough to deserve a promotion, or just flowers?" Jonathan cleared his throat. "Actually, I was going to talk to you about that. The board and I, well, mostly I believe you deserve more responsibility. A new title, Vice President of Strategic Development." Emma blinked. "Vice President. Yes, effective immediately, along with a substantial salary increase. Twice what Harper offered, I imagine." She studied him carefully. His posture was rigid, his tone rehearsed. It was the same Jonathan Pierce who closed million-dollar deals, not the man she'd seen struggle with betrayal. "Jonathan," she said slowly, "is this about rewarding me or keeping me?" He faltered, just for a fraction of a second. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she said firmly. "It matters a lot." By mid-afternoon, word of Emma's promotion had spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered in the hallways, some congratulatory, some skeptical. "She's moving fast," one intern murmured. "No one's ever risen that quickly under Pierce." Emma heard the whispers and felt her chest tighten. This wasn't how she wanted respect handed to her like a bargaining chip in a game she hadn't agreed to play. Later, Jonathan called her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, the skyline glowing faintly in the evening light. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I need to know where you stand," he said, his voice lower than usual. Emma sat, crossing her legs calmly. "Where I stand? About what Harper?" he said flatly. "And his offer? Are you taking it?" She hesitated. "I haven't decided." His jaw tightened. "What's there to decide? You're already more valuable here than you'll ever be to him. You know this company. You know me." Emma leaned forward. "Do I? Because right now, it feels like you're trying to buy me." Jonathan's eyes flashed, not with anger, but with something more vulnerable, fear. "I can't lose you. Emma, not to him, not to anyone." The words slipped out before he could catch them. He froze, realizing too late how they sounded. Emma's heart skipped, but she forced herself to stay steady. "Jonathan, what exactly are you saying?" He stood, pacing to the window. His hands flexed against the glass as if searching for words. "I'm saying, I don't know how to do this. I know how to negotiate, how to command, how to intimidate, but when it comes to—" He stopped, his back still to her. "When it comes to you, I don't know the rules." Silence stretched between them. Emma rose slowly, stepping closer. "Jonathan, you can't run this like a contract. You can't keep me here with money and titles. If you want me to stay, it has to be for more than that." He turned, and for the first time, the mask slipped completely. His eyes were raw, unguarded. "I don't know how to say it without sounding like a fool." "Then be a fool," she whispered. Jonathan searched her face, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he reached for the only language he knew: action. He took her hand, clumsy but sincere, holding it as though it might vanish. "Stay," he said, the single word trembling. Emma felt her defenses crack, but she pulled her hand back gently. "Jonathan, I need to know I'm more than leverage in your war against Harper. More than a secretary you upgraded to VP because you're afraid." His lips parted, but no words came. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap. That night, Emma walked home through the cool autumn air, her mind a storm. Jonathan's vulnerability had been real, she knew that, but so had his fear of losing control. Was she ready to stay in a place where affection came tangled with power, where sincerity was wrapped in titles and raises? Or was Harper right? Was she destined to lead on her own? Free of the complicated man who stirred her heart but didn't know how to give it fully, Her footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk, and with every step, the choice loomed larger. The storm had been building for days. Quiet glances across the office, conversations that ended too quickly, silences that spoke louder than words. Emma Caldwell knew it couldn't continue. If she didn't confront Jonathan Pierce now, she would suffocate under the weight of everything unsaid. That evening, long after the others had left, she knocked once on his glass office door and stepped inside. Jonathan looked up from his desk. He was still in his immaculate suit, tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up, a man trying to look composed while exhaustion carved lines across his face. "Emma," he said cautiously, "I thought you'd gone home." She closed the door behind her. "We need to talk." His jaw tightened. "About Harper again, I told you." "No," she interrupted, her voice steady. "About us." The word hung in the air like a live wire. Jonathan froze, his pen still between his fingers. "Us? Yes," Emma said firmly. "You've been throwing promotions, titles, money at me like bargaining chips, but you still don't see it. I'm not staying because you pay me more, and I'm not leaving because Harper dangled a big title. This isn't about jobs, Jonathan. This is about choice." He stood, crossing the room in 2 quick strides. "And your choice is to walk away from everything we've built here." From me, Emma swallowed hard, but didn't flinch. "If that's what it takes to remind you that I'm not yours to control, then yes." His eyes burned. "Control. Is that what you think this is? I'm trying to protect you." "Emma, do you have any idea what kind of world you're stepping into? The politics, the power plays, the knives waiting for your back. I know exactly what world I'm in," she shot back. "I see it every day, and I've survived it by being myself, not by hiding behind your shadow. You think protection is love. It's not. It's fear." Jonathan's breath came faster, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He looked like a man torn in half, one side desperate to hold her close, the other terrified of letting go. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice raw. "Everyone I've ever trusted has left, or betrayed me. Mark, my parents, even the damn board. If I lose you too." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't know if I can survive it." Emma's heart ached, but her resolve held. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Jonathan, I'm not leaving because I don't care. I'm leaving because I do. And because caring for someone doesn't mean surrendering yourself to them. You need to learn the difference." For a long moment, they stood inches apart, the silence thick with everything neither could fully say. Then Jonathan whispered, "Stay. Please." It was the same plea he had spoken weeks ago, but this time it carried more weight, less command, more desperation. Emma shook her head gently, tears pricking her eyes. "I can't. Not like this. I won't trade my freedom for your fear." He flinched as though struck. His hand lifted, as if to reach for her, but fell back uselessly at his side. "You're walking away." His voice cracked. She nodded, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Until you figure out how to let someone in without holding them down, yes." Emma turned, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. At the door, she paused, her back still to him. "Jonathan, I hope you find the man you're meant to be, not the CEO, not the untouchable giant, just the man." Then she walked out, the door closing with a final, quiet click. Jonathan stood frozen in the middle of his office. The silence was deafening now, emptier than he had ever known. His desk, his walls of awards, the city skyline, all of it felt hollow without the steady presence of the one person who had dared to challenge him, who had dared to see him. He sank into his chair, staring at the space she had just occupied. His chest ached in a way he couldn't fight with numbers or strategy. For years, Jonathan Pierce had convinced himself that power would shield him from pain, that control was safety, that walls were strength. But now, staring at the closed door, he realized the truth control hadn't saved him. It had cost him. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Pierce sat alone, not as a CEO, but as a man facing the wreckage of his own fear. The rain fell softly that evening, tapping against Emma Caldwell's apartment windows like a hesitant visitor. She sat curled on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, a mug of chamomile tea cooling on the table. The city outside buzzed faintly, but inside her little apartment, the silence was a refuge. Since walking out of Pierce Industries, Emma had felt both lighter and lonelier. She had no regrets Jonathan needed to face himself, but that didn't make the ache in her chest any less sharp. She had cared for him, perhaps more than she wanted to admit. A knock startled her, 3 steady raps, muffled by the rain. Emma hesitated, heart racing. Few people ever came by unannounced. She crossed the small living room, peered through the peephole, and froze. Jonathan Pierce stood in the hallway, but not the Jonathan she knew from the office. He wasn't in his custom suit. Instead, he wore a plain sweater, jeans slightly damp from the rain, hair mussed as if he hadn't bothered with perfection. He looked human, and for the first time, vulnerable. Emma opened the door slowly. Jonathan. His eyes met hers, steady but softer than she'd ever seen. "May I come in?" She let him inside. The apartment was warm, modest, filled with books and little touches of personality. A vase of wild flowers, a framed photo of her parents, a quilt folded neatly on a chair. Jonathan glanced around, almost self-conscious. "This is nice," he said quietly. "It feels alive." Emma crossed her arms, wary. "Why are you here?" He turned to her, and the words came without polish, without armor. "Because I've been a fool." Emma blinked. "I thought I could keep you with promotions, with money, with power," Jonathan said, voice breaking slightly. "But you were right. That wasn't love. That was fear. And I've lived my whole life letting fear dictate how close I let anyone get." He stepped closer, his hands open at his sides, as though afraid to startle her. "Emma, I don't want you because you make me look good to investors. I don't want you because you catch the mistakes I miss. I want you because you see me, the man behind the name, and no one has ever done that before." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but she needed more than words. "Jonathan, if you're here to say you love me, then understand this love can't live in a cage." "I know," he whispered. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The sound of rain filled the silence. Finally, Jonathan drew a shaky breath. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be normal, but I want to try. Not as a CEO, not as the man who always wins, just as me." He lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I'm terrified you'll turn me away. But if you do, I'll understand. I've given you every reason not to trust me." Emma studied him. His shoulders weren't squared in defiance. His voice wasn't sharp with command. For once, Jonathan Pierce wasn't untouchable. He was just a man, standing in her small apartment, soaked from the rain, asking for something he'd never dared before Grace. She stepped closer, reaching up to touch his cheek. He closed his eyes at the contact, as if it were the first gentle thing he had felt in years. "I believe you," she said softly. "But Jonathan, this can't just be about us. If you truly mean what you say, then it has to change how you lead. People at Pierce Industries are tired, scared, unseen. If you want me in your life, you need to care for them too. Not as cogs in a machine, as people." He opened his eyes, searching hers. "I don't know if I can undo all the damage." "You don't have to undo it," Emma replied. "You just have to start doing better. One decision at a time, one person at a time." For the first time, a real smile tugged at his lips, not polished, not rehearsed, tentative, but genuine. "You'd help me with that." Emma's eyes softened. "Only if you ask without trying to control me." His smile grew a little. "Emma Caldwell, will you stand with me as my equal, my partner?" Her chest swelled, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, but only if you keep your promise. No cages, no contracts, just us." He nodded, the relief in his eyes almost overwhelming. Just us. Later, as they sat side by side on her couch, sharing the last of the chamomile tea, Emma realized something. Jonathan Pierce wasn't fixed. Not yet. He was still haunted, still learning, still breaking free from his own armor. But, for the first time, he was trying. And for Emma, that was enough to take the next step. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the city washed clean under the glow of street lamps. Inside, in the quiet warmth of her small apartment, something new began, not built on fear, not on control, but on the fragile, hopeful promise of love. 6 months later, Pierce Industries no longer felt like the same company. The marble floors and glass walls were still there, but the atmosphere had shifted in ways money could never buy. Employees laughed in the hallways. The kitchen, once sterile and silent, now brimmed with fresh fruit, good coffee, and conversations that reminded everyone they were more than workers, they were people. Jonathan Pierce had kept his promise. The first changes were small, reinstating health benefits, restoring meal allowances, hiring back members of the cleaning staff. But then came the larger ones, creating wellness programs, flexible hours, mentorship opportunities. For the first time, Pierce Industries wasn't just known for its profits, it was becoming known for its people. Jonathan himself had changed too. He still wore his immaculate suits, still commanded respect in boardrooms. But there was a new tone to his leadership. He listened more. He asked questions instead of issuing commands. And when employees spoke, he didn't just hear the words, he acknowledged the people behind them. The transformation didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't perfect. There were stumbles, missteps, even moments when old habits crept in. But each time, Jonathan reminded himself of Emma's words in her small apartment that rainy night. One decision at a time, one person at a time. And Emma, she was thriving. Now, the director of human projects, a role Jonathan had created specifically for her. She carried her trademark warmth into every corner of the company. She organized employee town halls, celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, and listened to concerns no one else had ever bothered to hear. Her office was always open, her laughter a constant reminder that kindness could be a powerful form of leadership. On a crisp spring morning, Emma arrived early as usual, carrying a basket of tulips she'd bought from a street vendor. She placed them in a vase in the lobby, smiling as employees stopped to admire them. Jonathan appeared at her side, coffee in hand. "You're single-handedly turning this place into a garden," he teased. "Someone has to remind people that life exists outside spreadsheets." Emma replied with a grin. He chuckled softly, then grew quiet. His eyes lingered on her, thoughtful. "Emma, can I steal you for a moment?" She tilted her head, amused. "You usually steal me for meetings. This sounds different." "It is," he said. He led her to the rooftop terrace, a place they had both come to love during late-night work sessions. The city stretched before them, sunlight catching on the glass towers, the air crisp with possibility. Jonathan turned to her, his hands unusually unsteady. "I've spent my life believing strength meant control, that power meant safety. But you showed me something I never expected, that true leadership, true love, comes from care." Emma's breath caught. His voice wasn't rehearsed, wasn't polished. It was raw, genuine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. No grand flourish, no extravagant speech, just Jonathan, the man, standing before her. "Emma Caldwell," he said softly. "Will you marry me? Not because I want to keep you, not because I fear losing you, but because with you, I've finally learned how to be the man I was meant to be." Tears welled in Emma's eyes. She smiled, her voice steady. "Yes, Jonathan?" But remember, this isn't about contracts or cages. It's about partnership. Equal, always. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Pierce felt something he had never known in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals: peace. That evening, at a company gathering, Jonathan stood before his employees, not as a distant CEO, but as a man transformed. 6 months ago, he began. This company faced its darkest moment. But what saved us wasn't numbers or profits. It was people. People who reminded me that leadership is not about control. It is about care. And sometimes, all it takes is one courageous voice to remind us of that. He looked toward Emma, her smile radiant, her eyes steady. And for me, he added softly, that voice changed everything. Applause filled the room, but Jonathan only saw her. The night ended with laughter, music, and the quiet certainty that the future held not just success, but something far greater hope. And for Jonathan and Emma, standing side by side, hand in hand, it was only the beginning. At its heart, this story is not just about a CEO and his secretary. It is about what happens when pride collides with compassion, and when power finally makes room for empathy. Jonathan Pierce believed control was the key to success until Emma Caldwell reminded him that true strength lies in care. The lesson is simple yet profound: leadership, whether in a company or in our families, is never about domination. It is about lifting others, seeing their struggles, and choosing kindness even when it feels inconvenient. Emma's small acts, sharing breakfast, listening, speaking truth to power, transformed an entire workplace. They remind us that change does not always come in sweeping gestures. Sometimes it begins with one brave voice refusing to stay silent. For us in everyday life, the question is clear. Where can we be that voice at work, at home? In our communities, there is always someone waiting for understanding, for fairness, for hope. Perhaps the greatest takeaway is this: we are never too old, too ordinary, or too small to make a difference. A single act of courage can ripple outward, healing not just one life, but many. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and sharing in Emma and Jonathan's journey. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to support our channel by liking this video, sharing it with friends, and subscribing so you never miss the next story of hope and transformation. Your encouragement means the world to us and keeps these shining stories alive.